seventh seventh of our alumni presentation series, and I am so happy you all are here once again. Second Tuesday of the month. I'm Nina Barafaldi, and this is Leah
Hi.
Scott Kirby. Hi, Leah. Um, and we're from the practice of writing and Stonecoast, and we are also happy you're here. I feel like you guys all know that, but we'd just like to make it official. Um, And tonight we have practical world building with Lucas Carroll-Garrett. He is an emerging speculative fiction writer from the hills of East Tennessee. His work ranges from sword fights to meditations on human nature after the heat death of the universe. He's raised on myths from across cultures and trained first in the biological science. And Lucas brings both his imagination and systems thinking to the page. His work appears in Neon and Smoke and the Kadenkai. Is that how you say it, Lucas? The Kadenkai?
Kai Don Kai. I think it's like three syllables.
Kadenkai, thank you. Um, and the Galaxy's Edge anthology Beyond Strange Horizons. All right, Lucas, welcome. Are you ready to take the stage?
No, but let's do it.
Okay.
Um, I'm going to talk about world building today, and I think a lot of people come on here with like a paper they've adapted. This is more my thoughts and meditations on this stuff as I've been mulling it over for the past few months. And I want to take kind of a different angle to world building a little bit today. I think a lot of people have certain conceptions about all the systems and the languages, and you have to have 1,000 years of history or whatever. I think it's a little more approachable than that. So I want to talk about three approaches to make world building kind of helpful as a tool to you rather than as a burden, right? So that's kind of the angle I'm going at it from today. And it can be fun in its own right, but sometimes we need a little help. So first, I want to talk about what world building actually is, what it means, what we're talking about. And here's the plot twist. I'll tell you what world building is not: building an entire world. Can't be done. Think about it, right? This world, the one we live in, the normal one that we are all familiar with, is extremely complicated and huge. And it's hard to even study a tiny sliver of it and know it well and completely. So you can't, no one has that kind of time and ability to fully detail an entire world. It's always the illusion of an entire world. So that kind of thinking, I don't think is going to be helpful in trying to world build. So I want to talk about, what world building really is, what we mean when we say it. And it ultimately comes down to a question of setting, right? The world around the characters, the world the characters are stories and everything is taking place in. And it's going to be an intersection of a lot of craft elements as that setting is deepened and kind of spread outward. So you've got how you want to present the story, the tone, and the theme. Very important to world building. What kind of world is it, right? And one of the big goals is a sort of consistent rationale to this world. Why do things happen the way they are? Why is this detail chosen? Why does this character think this? And the ultimate goal of this is, I would say, immersion is one way to think about it. Um, Tolkien's essay on fairy stories, he calls it enchantment, right? That you want to believe in this world. You want to feel like you've been sucked into it and enchanted with it. If I had to give like a super pithy definition, what is world building? I would say coherent depth of setting, right? It's a setting that feels real and consistent. And there's a lot of ways to do that. There's a lot of ways to feel real and consistent, right? But the core question we want to look at is why this detail, right? Why do we have this choice or, this character or this animal or this magical system? Why is this detail that I need for my plot? Why is it justified? Because ultimately you're going to have to make some arbitrary decisions about what your story is going to be about, who's going to be in it, where it's going to be set. And the value of world building is asking yourself, what are you focusing on? What part of the world, what flavor of the world of reality are you going to present to your readers? And then you can build your more arbitrary decisions into something consistent. I want to set my story in New York. Okay, cool. What makes New York believable? What side of New York do I want to say? What are the fine details and the societies and the threads I want to draw out? And these are all setting questions, but when you have it very coherent and deep and interlocking, we tend to move into world building as a way of thinking about it. So it really boils down to what kind of world you want to present to your reader. Um, and fantasy is going to be a lot of the examples here because that's kind of it's what people think of when we think of world building, and there's a lot of different versions. So is it going to be a dark fantasy, kind of a low medieval fantasy with intrusions of magic, high heroic fantasy, or is it just a world of humans? Or are there only monsters, right? The humans are the real monster. There's a lot of stories like that. And that's a certain kind of world. And you've got to decide that going in. So here's a fun example. I was looking at two Scorsese movies set in the same period of time in the same place, right? Mid 1800s New York. But the world of the Age of Innocence and the kind of old money, high-minded, very delicate social ballroom dancing, and then the bloody street brawls of gangs of New York. Same place. I mean, these characters might have crossed each other in the road. Very different worlds, right? They live in different worlds. Technically, same place. But the feel of their world, the depth of it, are going in different directions. So, fun example. Another kind of fun example is the question of an eldritch horror. If you're into kind of the Lovecraftian, unknowable nightmares in his world, in Lovecraft's way of thinking about the world, right? To know something like Cthulhu is to go mad, to lose yourself to the unknowable veils beyond reality. What if that world didn't work that way? What if you could know the unknowable, right? What if there's not a limit to what humans can know? In that setting, Cthulhu isn't, the buck stops here, we're going crazy. It's a threat to be analyzed and countered, right? Maybe it's an action story where you can do more than hit him with a boat and hope he goes back to sleep. So they do one of my favorite games I've been playing is this theme of curiosity and tackling the eldritch horror in the game by trying to understand it rather than just giving up and going crazy. Because it's a kind of world where you can actually make headway that way. Lovecraft's worlds aren't. So, as we've seen, the world building and the setting and the broader rules of the world should serve the story you're trying to tell. What kind of story, what kind of ideas are you playing with? And we can talk about world building as a lot of people just say it as a hobby. You go in your world anvil, or Tolkien spends decades making his elf languages phonetically consistent or inconsistent in some cases to be more real. And that's cool and that's great and that's fun, but that's not what we're talking about today, right? This is a craft discussion, how we can make world building a little more approachable and more manageable. So ultimately, we want to think about it as a tool for immersion in the setting. Why is this detail here, both for the reader's sake, the writer's sake, and the character's sake? It should all make sense to some level. And one of the really crucial points I want to make here as well, because if you remember, we can't build the whole world. It's too complicated. We can't even build our own whole world. So this is a metaphor I stole from Tobias Buckel. If anybody here knows Toby, I worked with him for a couple semesters. And he gave me this really great metaphor on a mask, right? World building is a mask, is how he put it. Where you look at the mask, you look at the surface, and ultimately it's just what you see, right? It's just the painted facade of a face. But if you think about the mask as not just a facade, but as, what it represents, as the actual person, suddenly there's a depth. You go all the way back to the head and their history and their existence. And what you do is imply a deeper, more rich, more real world than you actually see, right? All we ever get is that surface layer. But if you build the mask really, adroitly with a lot of good detail and believable traits, suddenly it feels like a real person or a real world. So we want to keep that in mind as we world build. We can't explain everything, but if you feel like it makes sense, that's really all you need, for an effective story. So I'm going to go through, kind of talk about three common different approaches that we might try to use to get at this problem of a consistent depth of setting. And, maybe do a few examples and exercises here and there to try to think about this a little differently than maybe we're used to, right? So I'm stretching here. I'm trying to figure some of this stuff out still. So sorry if I'm a little rambling. But we have a lot of ways to go about this. And critically, these methods aren't mutually exclusive, right? A really well put together world and setting uses all of them. And a nice, like really super telling detail hits on all three of these approaches. So we don't have to pick just one. Please don't pick just one. But for now, we're going to pick ecological world building. So where we start, ground up world building, if you want to think of it that way. This is what I think most people imagine when they think the world building term. That's what we talk about when we say, oh, this has good world building. The rain shadows on the right side of the mountains and the rivers actually followed their way to the sea. Oh, very nice, right? That's world building in one sense of the word. And as you might see from my token quote here, one of the best ways to do that is a map, right? We know the physical land that we are on, right? The map of Rhode Island, the map of Middle Earth, right? The ecology of the four nations in Avatar: Last Airbender, right? Wherever we are, we need to know the setting has rules and systems that will not be just violated because the author feels like it. That's part of immersion, right? We can expect certain outcomes if we put certain things in. And by taking kind of a very broad, literal world thinking approach to this with our arbitrary decisions, we can build up from, well, I know this is a desert, therefore there's no water, therefore I need characters a way to get them water. You can build up and build a culture or conflict or a character from that. So it informs your decisions based on the setting, building the world up, right? And in this kind of approach, the climate, the technology, what kind of resources are here and what kind of resources aren't, is really critical to getting those details to fit into the world in a way that makes sense, right? The way reader can be immersed in a way that, like, yes, there's not just a giant field of lilies in the middle of the desert. I have questions, right? You don't want that to happen. So you got to ask, like, what grows there, what lives there, what natural resources are there, what do people want, what are they going to fight over, what conflicts will come together. And if you're thinking in terms of history, maybe you want a conflict, you want people to be afraid of snakes. So why might that be? Casting back hundreds of years, I need people to be afraid of snakes for this plot point. Okay, what if a giant anaconda got loose in this suburb and started eating pets, just terrorizing the whole suburb? And now all these neighbors are terrified of snakes. That was 20 years ago, but they still, you can go backwards and build a fun little story within a story that builds a reasonable history from the ground up, right? So one of the best examples of this is the Dune series. It's very much defined by the desert planet Arrakis. The whole planet, desert, no water, but it's got magical worms that make magical spice. And those facts define everything about the story, right? The culture of the Fremen who live there, their lifestyle, this pathological need to have and control and save water, their religion, obviously. And even it's going to shape the characters themselves, right? The harshness of the desert even cows some of the great houses that come in to try and mine it. And even the main character is shaped by this setting. He comes home for the first time when he reaches this desert in a way he's never felt. It's a very setting, ground up kind of focused story. And one of the fun things about world building, right, is it's not just for sci-fi and fantasy and fiction. A good nonfiction book makes you feel like you're in a certain part or slice or era of the world that you're not in. So world building and depth of setting is important to nonfiction too. One of my favorite examples is Otherlands by the British paleontologist Halliday. He basically goes back in time from the Ice Age back to past the dinosaurs, Carboniferous, back to where there's only like little blobs and waving fern-looking animals in the ocean. And each step of the way is detailing how it feels to be in this alien slice of our own planet, our own time, right? And he captures really well just the sense of being in this primordial jungle full of insects, right? And that's world building. Travel logs, going to a different place, history, going to a different time, right? Um, how a place works and feels, the systems within it are always a good angle of insight. And sometimes that insight is into the real world, sometimes it is into your fantasy world, right? So, a very useful tool. And we can see there's a lot of examples of this, right? Because this is the kind of famous version of world building, speculative evolution. There's this great artist named Alex Rice, who basically you can see his art here, built a whole world from scratch and evolved it from single celled life up to space age, these dinosaur looking things. Very cool long term project and a really great example of world building and how narratives emerge from that world building. So we're going to take ourselves a few minutes. I'm trying to keep an eye on time here, but we'll probably hit the full hour. I want everybody to try a little bit of this for yourself. If you've got a certain setting you've been playing with, or like a certain story idea, pay a little bit of attention to the place for a minute. And if you don't have one, there's some fun examples here. Roll a die or pick one. See if you can build a society on top of an erupting volcano. It's my personal challenge to you. And we're going to take, say, 3 or 4 minutes here to just come up with some details that would only exist in this place, in this kind of ecology. What emerges from your chosen place that fits that place? Alrighty then, if we all had time to get a few ideas jotted down, see where that leads you, what kind of conflicts can only happen on a coral atoll, right? Kind of interesting inspiration. And so this again is the kind of the classic world building, build from the setting up. But there are other ways to think about it that are kind of interesting and maybe not as common, but perfectly valid as well and very helpful. So let's talk about the other direction. You could call it top down, inside out. I call it cultural world building because it's usually based on the characters and their culture, their society first, right? Where we want to explore a certain culture or time period or like cool space age exploring people. I don't know, like you have a certain group of characters you want to mess with, right? Um, and if those characters are very consistent, if that society is very well realized, often the setting is maybe a second, I was going to say second class citizen. I don't know, second order thought. But we can kind of reverse engineer, do the opposite direction we were doing from the ecological world building, and ask what kind of setting, what kind of place would really fit this society. And if it's historical society, cool, your job is done for you because you can just research where they live. But you can really get into the details and what type of society you choose can play up or play down certain aspects of setting. It informs, again, why your details are being chosen. And this method is often less systems focused. It's less focused on those causal links of, okay, ocean, therefore boats, therefore yada, yada, yada. For maybe a richer present that's a little more character focused and a world takes a backseat but supports that kind of societal angle. So let's see what kind of world and tone really fits your story, what kind of feeds into your conflict. If you want people at each other's throats, you're going to have a different world than you want kind of a softer series where everybody's kumbaya and it's maybe a family friendly silly mystery, and another interesting angle you can go at is if there's like a cultural anxiety or ideal or value, something you really want to dig into and examine, you can build a setting that forces that confrontation, right? If you want a kind of a, crucible story where all these characters who have a lot of baggage with each other are forced together, you're going to need a world and a setting that supports that. So that's going to give you inspiration for like, okay, well, I can't have them in New York City. That place is huge. They're going to all go off in different directions. But if I have them on a boat, that forces them to be into each other. And if this boat is like sailing the stormy ocean, they all have to work together. So you can start going backwards and build a world that fits your setting, your conflict in a way that's still consistent with your story and with itself. And so this is an approach that kind of it's less logically progressive, but it's very helpful in focusing your story without kowtowing to the setting quite as much as an ecological. So some really great examples, and you can get some really, really good details from this. And I want to spend an entire slide dissecting 3 words to prove this to you. Right. So in the Iliad and the Odyssey, there's often this little kind of throwaway timing epithet called wine dark seas, right? That's how Homer describes the oceans. And if you think about it, logically from a world building ecological perspective, you're like, well, okay, the water, it can get dark, but it's never going to turn red. Like, what's going on here? What does that mean? So from a logical perspective, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But from a cultural perspective, it's super revealing about how these Greeks felt about the ocean, right? Their society has a certain relationship with the ocean. It's a dark and dangerous body of water. It's huge, but it's also kind of intoxicating, right? The Greeks sailed all around the Mediterranean. They established colonies all over the place. They traded up all the way from Africa, and they often died doing it, right? Shipwrecks all over the Mediterranean. If you lose sight of the coast, you're already dead, right? So wine is a really good metaphor for that relationship. You can lose control, but at the same time, there's an allure to it, right? It's dangerous and revealing in a way that most of the world isn't. The land isn't, right? So if you throw a little detail or epithet or setting touch in there, and it's in resonance with the culture, it can really reveal a lot and do a lot of world building, like I said with the mask, that cascades down into a better understanding of your characters and your setting. Game of Thrones is another really good example. Martin does a lot of good world building decisions, but there are some questions I have about it, right? Like if winters are really decades long, the kind of society he's built wouldn't exist because they would all starve to death, right? But that's not the point of the story, so we're not going to worry about that, right? It's very historically grounded. It's based on the War of the Roses, and he's moved the map of England around to have a better geopolitical tension and rivalry. And the history of his setting is really built to create these rivalries and these friendships between the knights and the houses, the betrayal, the drama. That kind of setting is built backwards from what he wants to explore, right? I find a lot of times his scenes with peasants are a little weaker than his scenes with the nobility because he's focused on the nobility and that question of what a knight really looks like, right? So his priority is different, and therefore his world is a little different from what you might see like Tolkien. But it's all to support this theme in this society of looking at a certain group of people and characters. Another fun example, again, nonfiction cookbooks, right? We don't think of cookbooks as world building, but it it's really a revealing practice, right? If you get a cookbook that's really good and has a lot of notes and annotations and history and culture to it, you can pull a lot of societal um, kind of trends and strands out of these recipes and these cookbooks. For example, I've got a great cookbook on Washoku style Japanese cooking because I'm a weeb, if you haven't noticed yet. But it's really an interesting cookbook in the sense that it has great food, but it also has a lot of comments and kind of connections by the woman who wrote it. And you can see like the frugality of this society of like, okay, well, this sidebar, if you use this broth for this and have a little left over, try going to this recipe and use it for that, right? Or, the rice water you've washed off, you can use it for this. And sometimes she'll offer little stories about where she got this recipe, why certain regions like it a certain way, others don't. And it's often very rich societal world building, just hidden in these little details. And why are these details here? Well, because she thinks they're important to her, right? That tells you about the character, that tells you about the world. And it's not focused from the ground up, right? It's here's how I see the world. Here are the details that fall out from that. So this is a bit of an unconventional angle, right? So I'll give you all another few minutes, let's say a good 5 minutes this time, um, to pick one of these cultures or your culture or whatever, interesting time period, people, group that you think you can dig into. If you've been working on a story about a particular group of people, great time to dig into it. If not, you can roll your die again, right? And see what kind of world details and plot threads and kind of ideas bubble out of setting ideas, bubble out of this kind of general societal level and conflict. And we're gonna share at the end here. So keep an eye on your previous world building details from the ecological perspective, and we can see if they connect it all later on, right? So we want to be using all three of these approaches. But for now, let's work backwards a little bit. What setting details can you pull from these societies? Okay. So from those of you I can see, it looks like you're thinking, but um, I have a timetable to keep, so I don't want to keep you all here all night. So let's keep those in mind. And again, this is an angle into a large subject. There's going to be overlap on all this stuff. Um, but this is another way to find your setting details and find your why of having chosen them. So the next way of thinking about this is probably the most nebulous one. I'm still trying to figure out how I think about it as well. But I think it's a really valuable way of looking into world building, window into your decisions about setting and the depth of setting and how it all fits together. And that's thematic world building, is how I'm going to name it. But like vibes based world building, right? If you have a theme, you have a goal, there's a certain feeling you want to evoke, that's going to color a lot of your setting decisions. And that can inform your world as well. Sometimes, your world doesn't fit together logically, but it still feels like it fits together. But kind of more absurdist worlds, maybe. I'm thinking of like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? Nothing there makes sense, but that's the point of the story. And the fact that nothing makes sense fits together. So the glue here is not really systems based or logically based, but emotionally based. How does your world feel? And I find this angle it's a little out there, especially for like big, long, fantasy sci-fi epics. But it's really good for shorter stories, maybe simpler stories like middle grade or kids fiction. And I'm finding the more I look into it, I'm thinking maybe there's some overlap with literary fiction and magical realism. The way Gabriel Garcia Marquez sees his world, it's true to him, right? That's his world. That's how he lives and sees this world. But it feels kind of a different world to us because we're not used to that magical realist way of thinking about reality. So, and yet it's very consistent because it's the world he lives in, right? So there's different angles to this that we can apply to get a maybe a little fresher take or more cogent thematic detail kind of pulled from the ether here. And the big question for this approach is how does your setting feel? How does your setting make the readers feel? How does the characters feel? What are the impressions you get? And you can find commonalities between elements of your story that aren't necessarily logical, but if they're resonant with each other, that again, it feels coherent and consistent in a way that maybe ecological world building doesn't. So if your world is very silly and whimsical and refreshing, the details of the setting will reflect that. And even if they're a bit absurdist, they're going to feel consistent. So this is a very heavy connection. This approach is very focused on tone. And again, that mask metaphor, as long as you can immerse yourself into the details, they don't necessarily have to make as much logical sense as the other approaches. And again, you can still use those approaches, you should, to connect all these things together. But the details in this approach are decided and explained based on more thematic connections. So absurdist comedy is a great example of this kind of mindset, right? So Terry Pratchett's Discworld is pretty clear in its goals of being funny, right? It's satirical and it's pointed and it's biting at times, but he's here to be, a humorist and have some fun. And the world building details reflect that, and they're often very silly. I mean, look at the world, right? What about the turtle moving makes any sense logically, right? You're not going to find the super intricate kind of Sanderson magic system here. Um, it's focused on a certain way of making the reader feel and have fun, right? And so a lot of places like the difference between Ankh-Morpork and the desert wastes out in the middle of nowhere are stark, but they're still very Pratchett, right? You can tell they're the same world, the same place, the same feel, because he's focused more on that kind of thematic world building. And again, this is kind of the more nebulous side of things, but it's a really interesting counterpoint to I think a lot of the assumptions about what world building means, right? Because if your world feels real, it doesn't necessarily have to make sense. There's different ways to be coherent, right? So we're gonna try it yourself again for a few minutes here, and then I'm gonna move on to my conclusion, and we can start kind of sharing what worlds and what settings we've come up with from our little random experiments here. So if you have like a certain theme you want to play with, a certain idea or like central pillar of your story, and then a goal of how you want your reader to feel or a tone. Um, Go ahead and pick. You can pick some from this list. Pick your own. I think it's more fun to pick some that don't necessarily go together, so you get a more interesting setting. And you can work your way backwards and build what kind of setting supports this theme or this goal. Um, I think I've skipped a slide here. So to give you some more clarity before we jump into it, I thought I fixed that, but oh well. Um, the One of my favorite fantasy series is the Del Taurus series by Emily Rada. And the thing I like about that one is it's very like tricksy and cleverness based. So she's chosen themes of like, you can't face the enemies in this fantasy world, the monsters head on. You've got to figure out their tricks and outsmart them and beat them at their own game. Because the main character really isn't good at much of anything except solving puzzles. He's very clever. So her world is based on riddles and traps and tricks and magics with a kind of a tell or a trick to them. That is not necessarily, there's no magic system involved. It's a very basic magic system, but it's designed to be overcome with cleverness. And that creates a consistency. We know how each monster is going to behave. The Monster Hunter games as well, good fantasy example in the more video game sense of things. Because when you think about like what's the point of a video game, right? We're here to have a good time. We're here to play a game and have fun, right? So that's our goal. So the world building should support that goal. And usually, video games don't have the best world building, but some of them, like Monster Hunter, um, has a really interesting ecological system. Because if you're going to hunt a monster, they want it to feel like a hunt, not just here's a boss fight in a forest, here's a boss fight in a desert. So you've got to track the monster. You've got to see what it eats, how it lives in its environment, track it down, lay a trap for it, right? What would you bait the trap with to lure it in effectively? And that all creates a very interesting web of ecological world building built out from this core principle of we want to play a game that feels like hunting this cool fantasy monster. So you build backwards from your goal. And again, this is I'm still trying to think about this, and it's very complicated. But some of the more recent like indigenous books and fantasy stories, a lot of really cool indigenous perspective popular fiction out there, have this kind of assertion about how the world is from the indigenous perspective that builds a world that is our world, but from a very different society's perspective. And one of the fun examples of that I remember reading from a while ago is Tracks by Louise Erdrich, where it's set up in I think it's the Anishinaabe tribe up in the kind of Midwest, where there is kind of the end of this reservation period is how this book is set. And it has a really interesting dual perspective, two protagonists describing the events of how this reservation is kind of nationalized by the government. And it often depends on like who's telling the story defines the setting. What kind of land is this? What are the rules? Is there actually some spiritual magic here at play, or is there not? And the characters are so faithful to their own way of seeing the world that there's often no overlap, even though they're the same events. And it's a really cool effect about how your theme and your perspective can build your world for you, or different characters' worlds in different ways. So with those examples, let's go back. I don't know why it did that to the try it yourself example. So go ahead and think about a goal, and if it's not a book, if it's a game or a cartoon and a piece of art you're drawing, still has setting details in it, right? So think about what your goal is, and think about the themes you want to explore, and what kind of setting details bubble up from that. What kind of world would support that kind of story? So this time for real, we're going to take another, see, 3-4 minutes here, and just see what pops up and see what connections you've drawn from your other details, what angles you can pull in to really flesh out this detail to make it make sense from every perspective in your world. Alrighty then. Getting here on the towards the end of the hour, so I'm gonna wrap up my spiel, and then we can take some time to maybe share with each other what kind of settings and worlds you've come up with all these experiments. And it'd be great to have some feedback on how these approaches work for you, because I'm still, again, this is very fresh off the mind. So let's see. Right. Plot twist number two. All of these approaches are wrong. Just kidding. So the best way to build a world, right, is not to just use one approach. You want to use all of them together, right? The richest, most harmonious setting that feels real is going to incorporate elements of logic and systems, and everything is consistent with itself, but also is going to be based off of real observations about real people and society. And it's going to have a very coherent, cogent theme that all of these details support and kind of explore. So this is kind of one of the big takeaways I want people to uh, think of as a world building tool is the limitations of a world and a coherent setting don't have to be restricted, right? In the same way, the form of a poem is restrictive, but kind of inspiring. Like, oh, what can I do with that? I see. If I have a sonnet, I've got to really bank on that turn. So I set it up in this way. You can think of this as kind of a scaffold or a source of inspiration. I need a detail for this as they're running through the street chasing the bad guy or whatever. What kind of detail? I know. We're set in this place, in this environment. Or, I've been working on this theme. You can pull setting details that feel coherent in these different ways using world building as a source of inspiration rather than a restriction. Because ultimately, again, we're trying to serve the story. So I'm going to just give a few more examples here while I have some time about some really, I thought, well done world building in Avatar: The Last Airbender is a great example of the harmony of all of these elements together, which is really fitting because it's a story about the harmony of the elements. And I don't think there are elephants. Sorry, I misspoke. So the interesting thing about how Avatar's world is built, and if you've not seen the show, it's a kids' cartoon, but it's really good, and stops being a kids' cartoon after about episode 10, and it's just fantastic. But one of the reasons it's so beloved is that the world they've built has a lot of consistencies between these three angles that we're talking about. So you've got the four different main nations here, and the one of the interesting things about the team behind the world building decided early on in the story is we're going to base these off of cultures that are kind of less commonly seen in fantasy, right? You've got a lot of Western kind of medieval knights. You've got a lot of Japanese samurai and these, manga fantasy stories. But do you have a lot of Korean Fire Nations? Do you have a lot of Tibetan nomads or Inuit waterbenders, right? And even the Earth Kingdom, which is itself kind of a broad, diverse land with a lot of different groups and ethnic cultures in it, is very heavily based on China, their dress, their customs. But all of these societies, even though they're based loosely on historical societies, are really thoroughly informed by their environment and their element as well, right? The firebenders are living on a bunch of rocky crags that throw up lava everywhere, right? So they have a very low population. So they make up for that by using technology and science like the Koreans did. So you see the environment and the history kind of go hand in hand. And as for theming, a lot of the story is about balance in the world and kind of spirituality and how to bring different people with different perspectives together for a common good. And so you need a lot of diverse perspectives and unbalancing forces to explore that conflict. And a rich, diverse world supports that. So you can see from each angle, this is a very consistent world. And because they're all consistent together, it feels immersive in a way that a lot of fantasy stories aren't. And of course, we can't get away without talking about old Granddaddy Tolkien and his Lord of the Rings, right? And I like to use him as an example for the ecological world building. But I just want to point out like how rich and diverse his setting is from each of these viewpoints, right? Let's say from a story role, he's a scene where like, okay, the hobbits have screwed up again because doesn't Pippin always? Let's face it. So they need an old wise guy with a beard to help them out. So very different perspectives on the old wise guy with the beard, right? They could be Treebeard, the Ent that has lived for millennia and doesn't really even understand what human society is, but is super in harmony with nature and is friends with each tree. Or you could have a dwarf like Thorin who's very focused on material wealth and pulling raw materials from the mountain and shaping them into powerful tools and weapons. He has a greed to him, right? He's not really in harmony with nature at all. But they're both going to serve the same plot role of kind of shepherding these hobbits to where they need to go. And they each have a very different view on the same world. Because the setting is so rich and deep, these characters have their own philosophies and histories and languages. They touch on the theme in different opposing ways. And they feel different because they're based in different environments and relations to those environments. So you can really see the multifaceted approach to world building in Lord of the Rings because Tolkien is so careful about it. So those are just maybe some inspirational examples to think about how we can really have a rich setting that's coherent from all these different directions. So again, I want to think of this as a tool. It's a setting tool more than anything else. How do you make your setting feel real? And so I'd say don't work for your fictional world. Don't slave away trying to fill out every valley and language route. Make it work for you. It's a source of inspiration. Ask your question, why did I want that detail again? And let that expand to fill out your story, right? And you got to remember, what is your story and your setting focused on? What is the goal here? And that can really guide your world building in a way that feels more coherent than just the plains have horses, right? So therefore, Mongols. What else leads to that, right? So I'm going to open up the floor here to examples. How did your experiments go? You got thoughts, you've got questions. Again, this is all very new, mind bouncing nonsense in my head. So if anyone wants to share, please feel free. I will shut up for a while.
I heard a thing about world building once where they said that it would help if you researched or came up with like how people not swear words. I don't know the sentence the what I'm thinking of what it's called, but like my grandfather used to say for the love of Mike, and that was because of his upbringing and whatever, and so. When she wrote Fantasy World, she would come up with these phrases that people say, and I've noticed that in other fantasy type writing where they, you know, it's not swear words, but it's, expounding or whatever the thing is. But anyway, yeah.
By the nine or whatever, right? Like swear by a certain god. Yeah. So yeah, that's a fun way to bring in the culture of a real world and paint a history. Maybe there's no reason why they say that, but it feels like there is, right? So that's a good example. Does
Well,
anyone
like
have
Neil
like
Neil Gaiman in his whatever the Underworld series that he also did television. He did a television show of it. It'll hit me.
Neverwhere.
Thank you for playing Neverwhere, which I really liked a lot. Um, all their all their swears or whatever included arches because it was an arch world, and so there was always like and her name was Door, and everything was sort of connected that way. It was a neat setup.
Lucas, I really appreciated the opportunity for thematic world building. I thought that was super useful for me because I feel like I've done some of the others, but so much of my work is maybe slipstream, and so I'm never in one particular world.
hmm,
And so then I started thinking about The Shape of Water, and I was thinking about like Still Life with Woodpecker, right? These places that are kind of reality based, but they have their very much their own vibe to them, and then how you would go about getting that. And so I'm appreciating the word vibe because now that's going to be I think that's going to be how I will attack it. Um, and think about it because I just feel like that's a little tool in my tool belt right now.
right? And I want this to be a toolkit. You don't have to do this a certain way.
Mm.
And I love the word vibe. It's so useless. It loops back around to being very useful. It's fascinating.
Yeah. I thank you. This was really helpful to me too. And I would agree with Nina that I'm more on the sort of thematic concept of it. And I saw there's on Lincoln Michelle's Substack, he has a whole thing about world conjuring versus world building. And that makes a lot of sense to me. That you're sort of evoking, sometimes you need it to be really detailed if you're a Brandon Sanderson sort.
Certain stories, right?
Right.
But I don't have time for that in a short story. I'm using the mask, right?
But the mask will get you started, right? I mean, I went to school with a guy who spent, you know, years creating his world before he really wrote much of anything, because he really wanted to see it through. And, if you've got the mask to start with, you can always backfill and
Right.
make it more concrete later, I suppose.
And that's kind of the mindset I want to push back against a little bit here, because like I've met a lot of people like that, right? A lot of, especially fantasy writers, who are like, oh well, I don't have my economic system figured out. What am I coinage? I'm like, dude, nobody cares. Write the dragon fight. That's what we're here to see, right? And so that can feel like a trap to me a lot of times. And it's helpful to know your setting really well, right? But if you waste years doing that and never write the actual book, you've never written the actual book, right? So backfilling is a very useful tool for a writer. And I'm not knocking like world building as a hobby or anything, but if you're trying to write a story, your priority should be the story, right?
It's much easier to research than to write.
Don't tell anyone.
You can hate on me all you want, but I've got a beard, so I'm okay.
What can you do?
Well, and I appreciate you pushing back on that too, because I think that's a really important point. You got to write the story, you got to write it because we could spend years researching and getting everything just right. Because I think so many of us are like have perfection in mind. We have to get this thing perfect before we send it out, or I have to know exactly what I'm doing. Um, and I think that's like in many ways our number one enemy.
But don't you think that some markets or some workshops can give you that impression that it has to be just right for anybody to want to buy it? It can, you know, there are people that can unintentionally, I think a lot of times, poison the punch a little bit, or
Right.
poison the process.
There can
I don't
definitely
know.
be a pressure there. And I want to poison it in the opposite direction, right? Like get that seed in somebody's mind. Maybe I don't have to do that. Um, and again, it depends on the story, right? Certain stories benefit from certain approaches to world building a little better than others. You I've tried kind of that ground up world building for like, 5,000 word short story, and it can be done, but it's really hard and you have to do a lot of work to even start. And I'm like, if I had gone the other route, I would have been done by now. So uh, part of it is, if the story exists, you can make it better. But if it never exists, you can't really backfill anything. So it depends on what you're trying to do, right? These are all tools, so use them all. Did anybody come up with some like cool world building details or resonances or anything from the little exercises that they'd like to share?
I really liked your prompts, and I'm not that fast, but it did draw it drew my attention to a couple of things. Like I really liked your island surrounded by monsters because it made me recognize how often that sort of surrounded on all sides sort of scene comes up, even if it isn't a literal island and monsters. And so I did brainstorm some potential scenes that would create that kind of issue in my work.
I really appreciated building from the society. I have a world that doesn't exist, so there's no geography there. The geography is totally built from the society, and I hadn't thought of it before. But then I started asking my questions like, why would this society build? What if you could build anything, would you build, given where the society is? But there's no geography, so it doesn't exist as a world. And I got some good stuff out of that. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, that your traditional world building angle is not going to help you there, is it? So, I'm glad to hear that. There are thoughts or questions or angles to add. So I'm still trying to figure this stuff out myself.
I really liked that you added all of the nonfiction in.
I'm trying.
And I hadn't really been thinking about that, but I was going to say if anyone's looking for a book rack, for world building, and we're looking at nonfiction, The World Without Us, which is from the mid 90s by Alan Weissman, I want to say it is, where it's basically a thought experiment, like what if we disappeared tomorrow? What would happen to all our stuff? And it's fascinating. Definitely worth looking at.
Did they do a TV version of that?
They
That sounds really
did. They
familiar.
they
Okay.
did make right based on parts of it.
Yeah, that was, yeah, I saw a few episodes of that when I was a kid. It was a cool, it's creepy, but it was a cool show.
Yeah.
I think a lot of science fiction's good for that kind of a, what would happen if? I mean, that's,
Mhm.
you know,
And what would the world look like if just this changed? That's an interesting
Star
question.
every Star Trek episode ever, you know.
And it's not specifically related to your prompts, Lucas, but it was interesting. I really like that you actually brought in the world building in video games. It's a type of writing that I don't think always gets enough love, but can actually be pretty fabulous in once it's inspected. And I think actually a really cool model of building things out that you were kind of like highlighting there too is actually like in a video game, one of the ways that they do open world games is they constantly load new packets of data as you approach them, right? So it looks to you as a player as if you're running around, all of Elder Scrolls, Morrowind or something. But in reality, it's just like slowly, in the background, loading things for you and, out to a certain distance. And you can kind of do that with world building too, where your character's going along and doing a bunch of random things, and you just like slowly load right out to the distance, right out to as far as the reader can see. But what's beyond that?
You know what? It doesn't matter. Don't worry about it, right? It's kind of freeing.
They only see what we tell them to see. Welcome to the world of a pantser, which is you only write up as far as the headlights can see. And as you drive forward, your headlights see a little bit more, and so you write a little bit more.
I did want
And
this
it
to be a little pantser friendly, right?
and it's scary as hell. I know people that actually write, they post like 2,000 word chapters to a website for people to read, and they don't write them ahead of time, and they post like every week. And so that, yeah, Liz, I'm with you. No way
Wow.
in my lifetime. I'm writing the whole thing beforehand, and then I'll schedule it to post once a week or every 2 weeks or whatever. There's no way I'm putting that. I would go blank. My head would explode. So yeah, speaking of being a pantser.
I'll figure it out.
But now I'm trying to do some dictation, and that's really tough as a pantser. You really have to know more about where you're going, and I'm struggling mightily with that. So.
I wonder if this is useful for any character first kind of people. Like typically when I write, I'm thinking of characters always. Um, but seeing this and kind of just creating conflict with setting makes me think, you know what? I might be able to start from world building. I don't know if there's anybody else who is always character first.
Well,
Well,
that's what my main thought was about all of this that was most helpful was that world building isn't just traditionally setting, it's also character and culture. And I think that's something that's going to be very, very helpful for me because a lot of my work is character driven first and foremost.
But your character has plot points. I mean, you chose that character for a reason, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that if you can take those plot points that you have, those scenes that you have in your head, that you want to write, you can work backwards from those to build your world that'll match that, or maybe not match. What am I thinking? Partner with that. That's not the
Yeah.
word I want, but
It's
yeah.
making me realize what places are most important to this character. So in that way, it is working backward. And what's feeding the tone and the theme, like you're saying, it all works together. It's
They should
really
interlog.
like it's really cool. You can't see it. I took so many notes. I'm there's a lot brewing around.
Right.
That's what
It's
we want.
think of when Robert Levy was because world building we're talking like big fauna cities, all of this, but I mean world building can be really tiny. And I'm thinking about how, Robert Levy said, have something, have a knife, or a pair of scissors or something sharp that they're doing something with, and it will ratchet up the tension, even if they're not doing anything at all dangerous with this thing, right? But like I think that that's a piece of it too. And when you were talking about, throw them on a boat if you need them to hash things out, I mean, that's very character focused.
Full disclosure, a lot of even my crazy epic fantasy stories often start with character. Like this is this really cool idea for a character that I want to explore and dig into. What kind of setting will they fit into? And sometimes it's like close enough. I'll make it work. Right? But sometimes I build like, nations and countries and histories out of just this one character that I want to have a certain conflict. And it can be a really fruitful source of detail that I rely on because I hate writing, and I find it really tedious. So I'm like, I need to find this detail. I know we're talking about the long term effects of violence on people. That house has been exploded 200 years ago, but they're still picking through it as they walk, just because that's how long it lasts. Boom, I have a detail for that angle. Come up. So it's a tool. And I think that's really fun way to look at it.
I was thinking you're gonna have a world. You're gonna have to build a world for like a criminal organization. Like I'm thinking a crime story, right? And even if you have a detective or police procedural, whatever, there's a world within the police world, but then there's also a different world in the criminal organization as to what motivates them and their pecking order and stuff like that. So you can almost, separate them in that. Well, you want to separate them in that way. They can't be the same unless you're trying to reflect that they're the same anyway, I guess.
Good multi POV fodder there. So I think that's always cool.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, the villain thinks
I don't
the
know how long my
story's about
internet's held
them.
out, but
They think they're the hero.
we
Lucas, I don't know if you've read the chat at all, but Jonathan just said thank you. One of the best parts of your presentation was your voice, deep and calm, humorous and authoritative. So I second that. I was
I
thinking
did
that
that on
halfway
purpose.
through.
So you should read your own books, do your own audiobooks.
I
Yeah.
can't talk for that long. My voice box the larynx will physically leave my throat if I try
I
to
think
talk.
you're
But
allowed to take breaks when you do audio recordings.
I don't know. I've heard some stories from the
I've
booth that you wouldn't
seen
like.
I've seen people that they stop after every sentence. Professionals, they read a sentence, they hit the space bar, they hit it again to start the next sentence, they hit a space bar, and that way, if something happens, they don't lose as much, and also they can add emotion to each sentence and not worry about doing like a whole paragraph. Um, Amazon has a whole section that teaches people how to do audiobooks with videos and stuff, and that was one of the things that they did. Sorry, digression. I apologize.
All right, guys, I think we're going to wrap it up for the night. Thank you so much, Lucas. Let's everybody give a little round of applause. Seriously, I have so much to work with. Thank you from a selfish personal standpoint. Before we wrap it up completely, just want to remind you guys what's coming next month on March 10th. We'll have Nina B. Lichtenstein for a generative class on writing through the body. We'll explore how memory lives not just in the mind, but in our physical selves, and how writers can access the body as a powerful archive of story. Through readings, discussion, and guided prompts, we'll experiment with writing from sensation, movement, and embodied experience to create work that feels vivid, grounded, and alive on the page. This will be great for memoir, fiction, hybrid forms, literally anything. And it'll offer us new ways to reconnect with memory and transform lived experience into language. This is personally one of my favorite subjects. So, I mean, if any of you have ever heard me ramble about emotion and the body, which you probably have. So I'm super excited. It's March 10th again, same time, 7 Eastern time. Also, just a little plug, Nina and I and Bill do a weekly Thursday Flash Club at 8 p.m. Eastern time on Substack Live. It's not Zoom, so you can wear whatever you want and not be self-conscious or feel like you have to chime in. But it's super fun. We do writing and reading for an hour.
I
And
went
Bill is
once. It
taking
was a
on,
lot of fun.
yeah, it's super fun. And Bill is taking on this next one. Bill, do you want to do a little plug for what you're going to do for Thursday?
We're going to read Christopher Lee Chilton's Touch Tank, which was in the most recent Smoke Long. And we're going to figure out why I like that piece so much. And then we're going to do a prompt that's inspired by that piece.
And I'm gonna call him Walter a lot.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, last week we had a fun performance with these two. They're really good together. So tune in.
We're gonna ham it up.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, guys.
Everyone.
Have a great month.
you.
Thanks for doing what you do.
Coming. Yeah.
Thanks.
Lucas, thank you.
So good.
Do I need like an after action report? Like, what's,
Oh, look at all. I want to show you my freaking screen.
It was
good
great.
luck.
It was super useful.
I felt like I devolved into rambling at several points. So I'm like, is this making any sense? It's comforting.
So many notes.
Yeah.
My mind is exploding right now. Thank you.
Yeah. This is what I like to hear.
And it was recorded, and I will even send you the Zoom assets. I don't know if you have been enjoying Zoom AI assets at all.
We love it.
I am wary of them and do not understand them.
They
frighten me.
They frighten me as well,
Okay.
but I mean, lots of times I'm like, oh yeah, there it is. It's all just organized right there. Thank you.
Sometimes it's really humorous too, and it just like pinpoints the most random shit. It's great, like meatballs. It'll just, yeah.
I like
Remember
meatballs.
that when I picked up on a meatball
Yes.
sandwich or something? Yeah, it's fun.
And it's going to be like, and Michael talked about the strength of his beard.
Yeah, exactly. To do.
You. You know, it's just fun.
Yeah.
It's worth a perusal.
As you do.
Yes. Okay, so
Okay.
hey, thank you. We'll post this once we get it. It usually takes a couple days. We'll put it up on the website, and once I get it onto YouTube, I'll send you the link.
I will never watch it because I can't stand my own voice, but I appreciate that it is archived.
Yes.
I don't. Yeah.
All right.
Like, not that
Fantastic.
high, I promise. I don't know why I sound high. All right. Well, thank y'all for putting this on.
Okay.
Bye.